Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that when investigating potential financial misconduct affecting Amtrak operations within Pennsylvania, a special agent of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General must consider the interplay of federal and state investigative authorities. Which of the following approaches best ensures a legally sound and operationally effective investigation while respecting jurisdictional boundaries? Option A. Focus solely on federal statutes and Amtrak-specific regulations, treating any potential state law implications as secondary and to be addressed only if legally compelled. Option B. Proactively engage with relevant Pennsylvania state law enforcement and regulatory agencies to establish formal interagency agreements and clear communication protocols regarding information sharing and investigative responsibilities. Option C. Share all gathered information with Pennsylvania state authorities immediately upon collection, assuming a collaborative approach without formalizing the process or clarifying jurisdictional roles. Option D. Proceed with the investigation independently, only contacting Pennsylvania state authorities if a direct conflict arises or if their assistance is explicitly requested by federal mandate. The correct answer is B. Proactively engage with relevant Pennsylvania state law enforcement and regulatory agencies to establish formal interagency agreements and clear communication protocols regarding information sharing and investigative responsibilities. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that special agents of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General (OIG) in Pennsylvania must navigate complex jurisdictional boundaries and information-sharing protocols when investigating potential fraud and abuse within Amtrak's operations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a delicate balance between thorough investigation, adherence to federal and state laws, and maintaining interagency cooperation without overstepping authority. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and damage to interagency relationships. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and establishing clear lines of communication and formal agreements with relevant Pennsylvania state law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies. This includes understanding their investigative powers, data access rights, and reporting requirements under Pennsylvania law and federal statutes governing Amtrak. By initiating these discussions early and documenting them through Memoranda of Understanding (MOU) or similar interagency agreements, special agents ensure that information is shared legally and efficiently, respecting each agency's jurisdiction and operational mandates. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of jurisdictional disputes and ensures that evidence gathered is admissible and that investigations are conducted collaboratively and effectively, aligning with the Inspector General Act and relevant federal investigative standards. An incorrect approach involves unilaterally assuming jurisdiction over matters that may also fall under Pennsylvania state law without consulting or coordinating with state authorities. This could lead to conflicts where state agencies have concurrent jurisdiction or possess investigative powers that are essential to the case. Another incorrect approach is to delay formalizing interagency agreements, relying instead on informal understandings. This creates ambiguity regarding data sharing, evidence handling, and the scope of each agency's involvement, potentially jeopardizing the integrity of the investigation and violating privacy or confidentiality regulations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over procedural correctness, such as sharing sensitive information without proper authorization or legal basis, risks violating federal and state privacy laws and undermining the credibility of the OIG's investigative process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the investigative mandate and the specific allegations. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential jurisdictional overlaps with state and local entities, particularly in Pennsylvania. The next step is to consult relevant federal statutes and regulations governing Amtrak and OIG operations, as well as Pennsylvania state laws pertaining to law enforcement cooperation and information sharing. Proactive engagement with identified state agencies to establish clear protocols and formal agreements is crucial. Throughout the process, maintaining meticulous documentation of all communications, agreements, and investigative steps is paramount to ensuring accountability and legal defensibility. Question 2. The control framework reveals that during an audit of a contractor's compliance with federal regulations in Pennsylvania, Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agents obtained sensitive financial data. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agents to take with this information to maintain investigative integrity and comply with federal guidelines? Option A. Share the sensitive financial data broadly with all OIG staff involved in the audit to ensure comprehensive awareness of potential compliance issues. Option B. Immediately forward the sensitive financial data to external law enforcement agencies for their review and potential action. Option C. Securely store the sensitive financial data in accordance with Amtrak OIG data handling protocols, documenting its source and relevance, and disseminate it only to authorized personnel with a demonstrated need to know for the purpose of the investigation. Option D. Retain the sensitive financial data indefinitely in the investigative file for future reference, regardless of its immediate relevance. The correct answer is C. Securely store the sensitive financial data in accordance with Amtrak OIG data handling protocols, documenting its source and relevance, and disseminate it only to authorized personnel with a demonstrated need to know for the purpose of the investigation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical juncture in the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG investigative process, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive information obtained during an audit of a contractor's compliance with federal regulations in Pennsylvania. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands a delicate balance between the OIG's mandate to ensure accountability and the contractor's rights regarding data privacy and proprietary information, all within the strict confines of federal law and Amtrak policy. The potential for mishandling this information could lead to legal repercussions, reputational damage for Amtrak, and compromised investigative integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate the legal and ethical landscape. The best professional approach involves meticulously documenting the information's source and relevance to the audit findings, securely storing it in accordance with Amtrak OIG data handling protocols, and only disseminating it to authorized personnel with a demonstrated need to know for the purpose of the investigation. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principles of due process, data security, and the lawful scope of OIG authority as outlined in federal statutes governing Inspector Generals and Amtrak's internal policies. Specifically, it aligns with the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, which grants OIGs broad powers to access information necessary for audits and investigations, while also implicitly requiring responsible stewardship of that information. Furthermore, it respects the contractor's expectation of privacy and the confidentiality of their business operations, preventing unauthorized disclosure and potential misuse. An incorrect approach would be to broadly share the sensitive financial data with all OIG staff involved in the audit, regardless of their direct involvement in the specific investigative aspect related to the contractor's compliance. This fails to respect the principle of least privilege and increases the risk of unauthorized disclosure or misuse of sensitive information, potentially violating data privacy regulations and Amtrak's internal security policies. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately forward the information to external law enforcement agencies without first conducting an internal assessment of its relevance and necessity for the OIG's investigative mandate, potentially overstepping the OIG's authority and prematurely involving other entities without proper justification. Finally, retaining the sensitive data indefinitely without a clear investigative purpose or proper archival procedures would violate data retention policies and create unnecessary security risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and legal mandates. This involves a thorough understanding of the scope of their authority, the specific regulations governing the information in question, and Amtrak's internal policies on data handling and dissemination. When faced with sensitive information, the process should involve 1. Assessing the relevance and necessity of the information for the ongoing investigation. 2. Ensuring secure storage and access controls are in place. 3. Limiting dissemination strictly to authorized personnel with a legitimate need to know. And 4. Documenting all actions taken regarding the information. Consulting with legal counsel or senior investigators when in doubt is also a critical component of responsible decision-making. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a special agent of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General, while conducting an audit in a regional maintenance facility in Illinois, discovers a series of invoices that appear to have been altered to inflate costs for parts and labor. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the special agent to take regarding these suspicious documents? Option A. Disregard the suspicious invoices as they are not directly related to the primary focus of the current audit and may complicate the investigation. Option B. Rely on the verbal confirmation from the facility manager that the invoices are legitimate and proceed with the audit without physically collecting the documents. Option C. Immediately attempt to correct the suspected fraudulent entries on the invoices to reflect what the agent believes to be the accurate costs, thereby mitigating potential financial losses. Option D. Secure the suspected fraudulent invoices, meticulously documenting their condition, location, and the circumstances of their discovery, and initiate the formal chain of custody procedures for evidence handling. Correct answer is D. Secure the suspected fraudulent invoices, meticulously documenting their condition, location, and the circumstances of their discovery, and initiate the formal chain of custody procedures for evidence handling. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for efficient investigative processes and the absolute requirement to maintain the integrity and legality of evidence. Special agents of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General OIG operate under strict federal guidelines and the Inspector General Act of 1978, which mandates adherence to legal procedures for evidence collection and handling. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the urgency of an investigation with the meticulousness required to ensure that any findings are admissible and withstand scrutiny, thereby upholding the OIG's credibility and effectiveness. The best approach involves a systematic and documented process that prioritizes legal compliance and evidence integrity. This means immediately securing the suspected fraudulent documents in a manner that preserves their original state and chain of custody. This includes photographing or scanning them in situ if possible, then carefully collecting them using appropriate protective measures, e.g., gloves, evidence bags, and meticulously documenting the time, date, location, and individuals present during the collection. This documentation is crucial for establishing a clear chain of custody, which is a fundamental legal requirement for evidence admissibility in any subsequent administrative or legal proceedings. Adherence to these protocols ensures that the evidence is obtained lawfully and can be reliably used to support findings of fraud or misconduct. An incorrect approach would be to immediately attempt to fix or alter the suspected fraudulent documents to make them appear legitimate or to remove incriminating information. This action directly violates principles of evidence preservation and introduces bias, rendering the documents inadmissible and potentially compromising the entire investigation. It also constitutes obstruction of justice and a severe ethical breach, undermining the agent's duty to conduct impartial and lawful investigations. Another incorrect approach would be to disregard the suspected fraudulent documents entirely due to a perceived lack of immediate impact on the ongoing investigation, or a desire to avoid the procedural complexities of evidence collection. This failure to collect and preserve potentially crucial evidence is a dereliction of duty. It allows potential fraud to go unaddressed and deprives the OIG of the opportunity to identify and rectify systemic weaknesses that may have enabled such activity. Ethically and procedurally, agents are obligated to investigate all credible indicators of fraud or misconduct. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on verbal accounts or informal observations of the suspected fraudulent documents without proper physical collection and documentation. While witness statements are valuable, they cannot substitute for the tangible evidence itself. This method fails to establish a verifiable chain of custody and leaves the investigation vulnerable to challenges regarding the authenticity and integrity of the information presented. It bypasses established investigative protocols designed to ensure the reliability of findings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential violations of law or policy. Upon discovery of potential evidence, the immediate priority is to secure and preserve it according to established protocols, ensuring chain of custody is maintained. This involves consulting relevant OIG guidelines and federal regulations concerning evidence handling. If there is any uncertainty regarding the proper procedure, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel is paramount. The overarching principle is to act with integrity, impartiality, and strict adherence to legal and ethical standards at all stages of an investigation. Question 4. The assessment process reveals that Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agents in Delaware have concluded a preliminary investigation into allegations of significant procurement fraud. The agents have gathered substantial evidence, but believe further investigative steps are necessary to solidify their case. A local news outlet has contacted the OIG seeking information on any ongoing investigations related to procurement practices. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for the special agents? Option A. Inform the news outlet that the investigation is ongoing and that no information can be released until the investigation is fully concluded and all internal approvals are obtained, without specifying the nature of the allegations or the evidence. Option B. Continue with the investigation, meticulously documenting all findings and preparing a comprehensive report for internal review and subsequent release in accordance with OIG policies and federal regulations, while declining to comment on any specific ongoing investigations to the media. Option C. Share the preliminary findings and evidence with a trusted congressional oversight committee, believing that such sensitive information should be escalated to higher governmental authorities before any public disclosure. Option D. Provide the news outlet with details of the preliminary findings and the evidence gathered, emphasizing the seriousness of the allegations to generate public awareness and pressure for corrective action. The correct answer is B. Continue with the investigation, meticulously documenting all findings and preparing a comprehensive report for internal review and subsequent release in accordance with OIG policies and federal regulations, while declining to comment on any specific ongoing investigations to the media. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG mandate to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, and the need to maintain the integrity of ongoing investigations. Special agents must exercise careful judgment to balance the public's right to information with the imperative to protect the confidentiality and effectiveness of their work. Prematurely disclosing investigative findings can compromise evidence, alert subjects, and potentially lead to the destruction of crucial information, thereby undermining the OIG's ability to fulfill its oversight responsibilities under federal law, specifically the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, which grants OIG's broad authority to conduct audits and investigations. The best professional approach involves a thorough and objective investigation, culminating in a comprehensive report that is released only after all investigative avenues have been exhausted and appropriate internal reviews have been completed. This approach ensures that findings are factually accurate, legally sound, and presented in a manner that maximizes their impact in preventing future misconduct. The release of such reports is governed by OIG policies and federal regulations, which prioritize the integrity of the investigative process and the protection of sensitive information. This methodical process aligns with the OIG's duty to provide independent and objective assessments of Amtrak's operations and programs. An approach that involves selectively leaking preliminary findings to the media before the investigation is complete is professionally unacceptable. This action constitutes a serious ethical breach and a violation of investigative protocols. It risks compromising the investigation by tipping off potential wrongdoers, allowing them to conceal or destroy evidence. Furthermore, it violates the principle of due process by potentially prejudicing public opinion before all facts are established and verified. Such premature disclosure can also damage the OIG's credibility and its relationship with Amtrak management and employees, hindering future cooperation. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to withhold all information indefinitely, even after the investigation is concluded and the report is finalized, citing vague concerns about potential negative publicity. While OIGs must be mindful of the impact of their reports, a blanket refusal to release findings once an investigation is complete and the report is ready for dissemination, without specific legal or regulatory justification, such as ongoing criminal proceedings or national security concerns, undermines the OIG's transparency mandate. The Inspector General Act encourages public reporting of findings to promote accountability and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. Finally, an approach that involves sharing investigative details with external stakeholders, such as congressional committees, without adhering to established OIG protocols for reporting and dissemination, is also professionally unsound. While cooperation with oversight bodies is important, the method of information sharing must be controlled and authorized to maintain the integrity of the investigation and comply with relevant regulations governing the handling of sensitive investigative information. Unauthorized disclosure can lead to legal ramifications and erode trust in the OIG's processes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established investigative procedures, legal mandates, and ethical guidelines. This involves a commitment to thoroughness, objectivity, and confidentiality throughout the investigative lifecycle. When faced with decisions regarding information dissemination, agents should consult OIG policies, legal counsel, and their supervisors to ensure compliance and maintain the highest standards of professional conduct. The ultimate goal is to serve the public interest by ensuring accountability and promoting efficiency within Amtrak, while upholding the integrity of the investigative process. Question 5. Analysis of a potential fraud scheme involving procurement irregularities at Amtrak, a federally funded entity operating within the United States, requires special agents of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General to access employee electronic communications and financial records. Considering the principles of lawful investigation and the protection of individual privacy, which of the following methods for obtaining and reviewing this information represents the most professionally sound and legally compliant approach for an Amtrak OIG special agent? Option A. Proceed with a broad review of all employee electronic communications and financial records within Amtrak systems, assuming that any information discovered could potentially be relevant to the investigation. Option B. Share preliminary findings and raw data obtained during the investigation with Amtrak's Human Resources Department to solicit their assistance in identifying potentially relevant information, without formal OIG authorization for such disclosure. Option C. Obtain necessary legal authorizations, such as warrants or subpoenas, for access to employee electronic communications and financial records that are not already within the OIG's authorized access scope, and meticulously limit data review to information directly relevant to the suspected procurement irregularities. Option D. Request informal access to all relevant employee electronic communications and financial records directly from Amtrak management, without pursuing formal legal documentation, relying on their cooperation. The correct answer is C. Obtain necessary legal authorizations, such as warrants or subpoenas, for access to employee electronic communications and financial records that are not already within the OIG's authorized access scope, and meticulously limit data review to information directly relevant to the suspected procurement irregularities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG mandate to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, and the potential for information obtained during an investigation to inadvertently reveal sensitive personal information of individuals not directly involved in the suspected misconduct. Special agents must exercise extreme care to balance the need for thorough investigation with the protection of privacy rights, particularly when dealing with data that might be accessed through Amtrak's internal systems. The risk of overreach or improper disclosure can lead to legal repercussions, damage to the OIG's reputation, and erosion of trust with Amtrak employees and management. The correct approach involves a meticulous and legally sound method of data acquisition and analysis. This entails obtaining necessary legal authorizations, such as subpoenas or warrants, when accessing information that falls outside the scope of routine OIG access privileges. Furthermore, it requires employing data minimization techniques, focusing only on information directly relevant to the suspected fraud, waste, or abuse. This approach is correct because it aligns with federal statutes governing investigations, including those that protect individual privacy and define the scope of investigative authority. Specifically, it adheres to principles of due process and the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, ensuring that investigative actions are lawful and proportionate. The OIG's authority is derived from and limited by federal law, and any investigative action must respect these boundaries. An incorrect approach would be to broadly access and review all employee records within a system, assuming that any information might be relevant. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates privacy expectations and potentially exceeds the OIG's lawful authority. Such broad access could lead to the discovery of information unrelated to the investigation, creating a risk of improper disclosure or use. This action would likely contravene federal privacy laws and OIG internal policies designed to safeguard sensitive data. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal requests for information from Amtrak management without proper documentation or legal basis, especially when the information sought is personal in nature or requires access beyond standard OIG purview. This is professionally unacceptable as it bypasses established legal safeguards and can lead to the unauthorized disclosure of protected information. It undermines the integrity of the investigative process by not adhering to the formal procedures required for obtaining sensitive data, potentially creating a perception of bias or impropriety. A third incorrect approach is to share preliminary findings or raw data with individuals outside the OIG who do not have a legitimate need to know, even if they are Amtrak employees. This is professionally unacceptable as it constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can violate privacy laws and OIG regulations regarding the dissemination of investigative information. Such disclosures can jeopardize the investigation, expose individuals to unwarranted scrutiny, and lead to severe disciplinary action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and the protection of individual rights. This involves understanding the scope of their authority, identifying potential legal and ethical pitfalls, and consulting with legal counsel when in doubt. A systematic approach to evidence gathering, ensuring relevance and proportionality, and maintaining strict confidentiality are paramount. When faced with situations involving sensitive personal information, agents must always err on the side of caution and adhere to established protocols for obtaining and handling such data. Question 6. The review process indicates that Special Agent Miller, while conducting an investigation into alleged financial improprieties at a vendor company, discovers that the primary witness providing crucial evidence is a former colleague with whom Special Agent Miller had a close working relationship and a history of professional disagreements in their previous role at a different federal agency in Washington, D.C. Given this situation, what is the most appropriate course of action for Special Agent Miller to take to uphold the integrity of the investigation and the standards of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General? Option A. Continue with the investigation, but make a conscious effort to be extra objective when interviewing the former colleague and evaluating their testimony. Option B. Proceed with the investigation as planned, believing that their personal objectivity is sufficient to overcome any potential bias stemming from the past relationship. Option C. Discreetly attempt to gather corroborating evidence from other sources to mitigate any perceived bias from the witness's testimony, without formally disclosing the relationship. Option D. Immediately report the prior professional relationship and potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and await further instructions regarding their continued involvement in the investigation. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the prior professional relationship and potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and await further instructions regarding their continued involvement in the investigation. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest and a breach of ethical conduct concerning Special Agent Miller's involvement in an investigation. The professional challenge lies in balancing the imperative to conduct thorough investigations with the absolute requirement to maintain impartiality and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. Special Agent Miller's prior professional relationship with the subject of the investigation creates a significant risk of bias, which could compromise the integrity of the investigation and the credibility of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General OIG. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation in strict adherence to the Amtrak OIG's established policies and ethical standards, which are designed to uphold public trust and ensure the fairness of investigative processes. The best professional practice involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate supervisory authority. This approach ensures transparency and allows for an objective assessment of the situation by those with the authority to mitigate any risks. By proactively reporting the relationship, Special Agent Miller demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and the integrity of the OIG's operations. This aligns with the core principles of investigative ethics, which emphasize impartiality, objectivity, and the avoidance of situations that could reasonably be perceived as compromising an investigation. The Amtrak OIG's internal policies and the broader principles of public service demand that agents act without bias and report any circumstances that could undermine this principle. Failing to disclose the prior professional relationship and proceeding with the investigation creates a significant ethical failure. This approach suggests a disregard for the OIG's conflict of interest policies and the fundamental ethical obligation to maintain impartiality. It exposes the investigation to challenges regarding its validity and fairness, potentially leading to the suppression of evidence or the dismissal of findings. Furthermore, it erodes public trust in the OIG's ability to conduct objective oversight. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to manage the conflict internally without formal disclosure, perhaps by consciously trying to be extra objective. While the intention might be to overcome the bias, this is insufficient. The appearance of bias is as damaging as actual bias, and without formal disclosure and supervisory review, the perception of impropriety will persist. This approach fails to acknowledge the OIG's established procedures for managing conflicts, which are designed to provide an independent and authoritative resolution. Finally, continuing the investigation without any acknowledgement of the relationship, believing that personal objectivity is sufficient, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the importance of procedural fairness and the impact of perceived bias on the credibility of the OIG. It prioritizes personal judgment over established ethical protocols and supervisory oversight, which are critical for maintaining the integrity of the investigative function. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's ethical guidelines and conflict of interest policies. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate step should be to identify the nature of the relationship and its potential impact on the investigation. This should be followed by a prompt and complete disclosure to a supervisor, providing all relevant details. The supervisor then has the responsibility to assess the conflict and determine the appropriate course of action, which may include reassigning the investigation or implementing specific safeguards. This structured approach ensures that conflicts are managed transparently and effectively, upholding the integrity of the OIG's work. Question 7. Performance analysis shows that an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent, while conducting a routine audit of a vendor contract in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, observes a vendor employee appearing to deliberately misrepresent project completion data on an invoice submitted to Amtrak. The special agent is aware that this vendor has a history of minor billing discrepancies, but this instance appears more significant. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Ignore the observation, assuming it is a minor issue that does not warrant OIG attention. Option B. Immediately document the observation and report it through official OIG channels for investigation. Option C. Directly confront the vendor employee to question the accuracy of the submitted data. Option D. Discuss the observation with other Amtrak personnel not involved in the OIG investigation to seek their opinion. The correct answer is B. Immediately document the observation and report it through official OIG channels for investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG mandate to ensure integrity and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse within Amtrak. Special agents are entrusted with significant authority and must exercise sound judgment when encountering potential misconduct. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to act ethically and within legal boundaries, particularly when dealing with sensitive information and potential conflicts of interest. The OIG's authority is derived from federal statutes and Amtrak policies, requiring strict adherence to established procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately reporting the observed potential misconduct to the appropriate internal OIG investigative channels. This approach aligns with the OIG's established protocols for handling allegations of fraud, waste, or abuse. Federal regulations governing inspectors general, such as those found in the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, mandate that OIGs receive and investigate such allegations. By reporting internally, the special agent ensures that the matter is handled by trained investigators, that proper procedures are followed, and that potential conflicts of interest are managed. This also preserves the integrity of the investigation and prevents premature or unauthorized actions that could compromise evidence or violate an individual's rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly confronting the employee and attempting to resolve the issue informally. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established OIG investigative procedures, potentially compromises the investigation by tipping off the subject, and may exceed the special agent's authority for informal resolution. It also fails to document the allegation properly, which is a critical component of OIG oversight. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the observed behavior, assuming it is minor or not within the OIG's purview. This is a significant ethical and professional failure. The OIG has a broad mandate to address fraud, waste, and abuse, and failing to report potential issues can be construed as dereliction of duty. It undermines the OIG's effectiveness and can allow more serious problems to fester. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the observed behavior with colleagues outside of the official OIG investigative process without a clear need to know. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can lead to the spread of unsubstantiated rumors, damaging reputations, and potentially prejudicing any future investigation. It also violates OIG policies regarding the handling of sensitive information. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the OIG should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and ethical guidelines. When encountering potential misconduct, the first step should always be to assess whether the situation falls within the OIG's jurisdiction. If it does, the immediate and correct course of action is to report it through the designated internal channels. This ensures that the investigation is conducted impartially, legally, and effectively, upholding the integrity of the OIG's mission. Documentation and communication should be strictly limited to official channels and personnel involved in the investigation. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent in Delaware observes an employee in a restricted area, appearing to be downloading sensitive proprietary information onto a personal USB drive. The agent is aware that unauthorized removal of such information could have significant financial and operational repercussions for Amtrak. Considering the investigative protocols and the need for prompt action, which of the following courses of action best aligns with professional investigative standards and regulatory requirements for an OIG special agent? Option A. Immediately document the observed activity in detail, including the employee's actions, the location, and the time, and promptly report these findings to the special agent in charge, SAC, or designated supervisor for further direction. Option B. Contact Amtrak's Chief Information Officer to inform them of the suspected data exfiltration and request their assistance in securing the employee's workstation. Option C. Make a mental note of the observation but decide not to report it immediately, believing it might be a routine data backup and not worth escalating without further evidence. Option D. Directly approach the employee, identify yourself as an OIG special agent, and demand to inspect the contents of the USB drive and the employee's computer. The correct answer is A. Immediately document the observed activity in detail, including the employee's actions, the location, and the time, and promptly report these findings to the special agent in charge, SAC, or designated supervisor for further direction. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between the need for swift action to protect Amtrak's assets and the imperative to adhere strictly to the investigative protocols established by the Amtrak Office of Inspector General OIG and relevant federal statutes governing investigations. Special agents must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring that their actions are both effective and legally sound, thereby maintaining the integrity of the investigation and the trust placed in the OIG. The best professional approach involves meticulously documenting all observed activities and immediately reporting the findings to the appropriate supervisory personnel within the OIG. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of investigative procedure, which mandate thorough documentation and chain of custody for any evidence or observations. Specifically, it adheres to the investigative guidelines that require all significant findings to be formally recorded and reviewed by supervisors before any action is taken that could impact an ongoing investigation or involve external parties. This ensures that any subsequent actions are authorized, legally permissible, and strategically sound, preventing premature disclosure or contamination of potential evidence. An incorrect approach would be to directly confront the individual and demand access to the materials without prior authorization or supervisory guidance. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established OIG protocols for evidence collection and access, potentially jeopardizing the investigation by alerting the subject prematurely. It also risks violating the individual's rights and could lead to the inadmissibility of any information obtained. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of respect for the established hierarchy and procedural safeguards designed to ensure the integrity and legality of OIG investigations. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the observation, assuming it is not significant enough to warrant immediate attention. This is professionally unacceptable, as it represents a failure to uphold the duty of vigilance and reporting expected of an OIG special agent. Such an action could allow for the destruction of evidence, the continuation of illicit activity, or a missed opportunity to gather critical information that could prevent future harm to Amtrak. It demonstrates a dereliction of duty and a disregard for the OIG's mission to promote economy, efficiency, and integrity within Amtrak. A further incorrect approach would be to immediately contact Amtrak management to report the suspected activity without first consulting with OIG supervisors. This is professionally unacceptable because it breaches the confidentiality and investigative autonomy of the OIG. Sharing sensitive investigative information with external parties, even within Amtrak management, before it has been vetted and approved by the OIG leadership, can compromise the investigation, create unnecessary alarm, or lead to actions by Amtrak management that could interfere with the OIG's investigative process. The professional reasoning framework that should guide decision-making in similar situations involves a systematic process. First, assess the immediate risk to Amtrak assets or ongoing investigations. Second, consult the relevant OIG policies and procedures for handling such observations. Third, report findings and proposed actions to immediate supervisors for guidance and authorization. And fourth, act only upon explicit direction, ensuring all actions are documented and legally compliant. This structured approach prioritizes adherence to established protocols, while allowing for informed and authorized responses to developing situations. Question 9. Investigation of potential procurement fraud within Amtrak's operations in New York State has surfaced allegations of bid rigging involving a specific vendor. As a special agent with the Amtrak Office of Inspector General, which of the following investigative strategies would best uphold the principles of thoroughness, impartiality, and regulatory compliance under federal procurement laws and Amtrak's internal policies? Option A. Immediately confront the suspected vendor and key Amtrak employees involved based on the initial allegations to elicit confessions and expedite the resolution. Option B. Share the preliminary allegations and investigative leads with other Amtrak departments and external stakeholders to solicit their opinions and potential evidence. Option C. Focus exclusively on the initial whistleblower statement, using it as the primary basis for all investigative actions and findings, without seeking further independent evidence. Option D. Systematically gather and analyze all relevant procurement documentation, financial records, and communications related to the alleged bid rigging, seeking corroboration from multiple sources before forming conclusions. The correct answer is D. Systematically gather and analyze all relevant procurement documentation, financial records, and communications related to the alleged bid rigging, seeking corroboration from multiple sources before forming conclusions. Explanation. Investigation of potential fraud within Amtrak's procurement process presents a significant professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need for swift action to prevent further financial loss and the imperative to conduct a thorough, impartial investigation that respects due process and maintains the integrity of Amtrak's operations. Special agents must balance the urgency of uncovering wrongdoing with the legal and ethical obligations to gather evidence meticulously, protect confidentiality, and avoid prejudicing any potential future legal proceedings. The reputation of the Office of Inspector General (OIG) and Amtrak itself hinges on the professionalism and accuracy of such investigations. The most appropriate approach involves a systematic and documented evidence-gathering process, prioritizing the collection of objective data and corroborating information from multiple sources. This includes reviewing procurement records, financial statements, contracts, and communication logs, as well as conducting discrete interviews with relevant personnel. The focus is on establishing a factual basis for any allegations of misconduct, adhering strictly to Amtrak's internal policies and procedures, and relevant federal statutes governing fraud and procurement integrity. This methodical approach ensures that any findings are well supported, defensible, and can withstand scrutiny, thereby upholding the OIG's mandate to promote economy and efficiency within Amtrak and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. An approach that prematurely focuses on a single suspect without comprehensive evidence collection is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to a biased investigation, potentially overlooking other responsible parties or misattributing blame. It risks violating the rights of individuals by creating a presumption of guilt before sufficient evidence is gathered, which is ethically unsound and can have legal repercussions. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely solely on hearsay or unsubstantiated allegations without independent verification. While initial tips or suspicions may initiate an investigation, they cannot form the basis of findings without corroboration. This failure to seek objective evidence undermines the credibility of the investigation and can lead to incorrect conclusions, potentially damaging innocent parties and failing to address the actual wrongdoing. Finally, an approach that involves unauthorized disclosure of investigative information to external parties or internal stakeholders not directly involved in the investigation is a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Confidentiality is paramount to protect the integrity of the investigation, prevent tipping off potential wrongdoers, and safeguard the privacy of individuals involved. Such disclosures can compromise evidence, obstruct justice, and violate Amtrak's policies and federal privacy laws. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the allegations and the scope of the investigation. This involves developing an investigative plan that outlines objectives, methodologies, and resources. Throughout the investigation, continuous assessment of evidence, adherence to legal and ethical standards, and maintaining objectivity are crucial. Regular consultation with legal counsel and supervisors ensures that the investigation remains on track and compliant with all applicable regulations and policies. Question 10. Comparative studies suggest that accurate overtime compensation is crucial for maintaining employee morale and legal compliance within federal agencies. Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent, Agent Miller, based in Washington, D.C., worked the following hours during a specific workweek. Monday, 8 hours, including 2 hours of travel to an off-site investigation. Tuesday, 9 hours, including 1 hour of travel back from the off-site investigation. Wednesday, 8 hours. Thursday, 10 hours, including 3 hours of travel to a different city for a new investigation. Friday, 7 hours, including 2 hours of travel back to the primary duty station. If Agent Miller's regular hourly rate is $30.00, and assuming all travel time is considered compensable under the FLSA and Amtrak policy, what is Agent Miller's total overtime pay for this workweek? Option A, $180.00. Option B, $210.00. Option C, $120.00. Option D, $150.00. Correct answer is A, $180.00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent involving the accurate calculation of overtime compensation for investigative staff. The challenge lies in correctly interpreting and applying the specific overtime provisions outlined in the U.S. Department of Labor's Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, and Amtrak's internal policies, which may have nuances regarding travel time and compensatory time off. Miscalculation can lead to underpayment or overpayment of wages, potentially resulting in employee grievances, legal action, and damage to the OIG's credibility. The agent must demonstrate meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of relevant regulations to ensure fair and compliant compensation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the total hours worked by the special agent, including all compensable travel time as defined by the FLSA and Amtrak policy, and then applying the statutory overtime rate of 1. 5 times the regular rate of pay for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the FLSA mandate for overtime pay and ensures that all time spent performing duties for the employer, including necessary travel, is properly accounted for. Amtrak's internal policies, when compliant with the FLSA, would further clarify what constitutes compensable travel. This method ensures accuracy, fairness, and legal compliance, safeguarding both the employee and the organization. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to exclude all travel time from the calculation of hours worked, assuming it is not compensable. This is a regulatory failure because the FLSA generally considers travel time to be compensable when it is for the benefit of the employer and occurs during the employee's established work hours, or when it involves specific duties performed during travel. Another incorrect approach would be to apply a flat overtime rate without considering the actual hours worked over 40 in a workweek, or to only pay overtime for hours worked beyond a standard workday rather than a workweek. This is a failure to comply with the FLSA-specific definition of overtime, which is based on a 40-hour workweek. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to deduct compensatory time off from the overtime calculation without proper authorization or adherence to FLSA guidelines for compensatory time, which are generally restricted for non-exempt employees. This could lead to a violation of wage and hour laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a systematic approach. First, clearly identify all hours worked, meticulously documenting all activities including travel. Second, consult the relevant sections of the FLSA and Amtrak's employee handbook or compensation policies to determine which activities are compensable. Third, perform the overtime calculation based on the total compensable hours worked in a workweek, applying the 1.5 times rate for all hours exceeding 40. Fourth, if there are any ambiguities, seek clarification from the appropriate HR or legal department. This structured process ensures accuracy, compliance, and ethical treatment of employees. Question 11. The investigation demonstrates that an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent in New York has discovered allegations of misconduct against a senior Amtrak manager with whom the agent has a pre-existing close personal friendship. Which of the following actions best upholds the integrity of the investigation and ethical standards? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the special agent supervisor and request recusal from any involvement in the investigation. Option B. Conduct the investigation, but strictly limit all interactions with the senior manager to formal professional settings. Option C. Discuss the allegations and the investigation's progress with the senior manager in a personal capacity to gauge their perspective. Option D. Proceed with the investigation, confident in the ability to remain impartial despite the personal friendship. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the special agent's supervisor and request recusal from any involvement in the investigation. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent in New York must navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain impartiality while investigating allegations of misconduct involving a senior Amtrak manager who is also a personal acquaintance. The professional challenge lies in balancing the duty to conduct a thorough and unbiased investigation with the personal relationship, which could be perceived as influencing the investigation's outcome. Careful judgment is required to ensure the integrity of the investigative process and public trust in the Office of Inspector General. The best approach involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the special agent's supervisor and recusing oneself from any direct involvement in the investigation. This approach is correct because it adheres to fundamental principles of investigative ethics and integrity, as well as the standards expected of federal inspectors general. Specifically, it aligns with the U.S. Office of Government Ethics, OGE, regulations concerning conflicts of interest, which mandate the avoidance or divestment of situations that could impair impartiality or create an appearance of impropriety. By disclosing and recusing, the agent upholds the principle of objectivity, ensuring that the investigation is conducted by an impartial party free from personal bias or the appearance of bias. This protects the credibility of the OIG and ensures a fair process for all parties involved. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investigation while attempting to remain impartial, believing that personal feelings will not influence the outcome. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to address the appearance of impropriety, which is as damaging as actual bias. The U.S. OGE regulations emphasize not only the avoidance of actual conflicts, but also the avoidance of even the appearance of a conflict. A reasonable observer might question the impartiality of an investigation conducted by someone with a personal relationship with the subject. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct the investigation, but limit interactions with the senior manager to purely professional matters, believing this is sufficient to maintain objectivity. This is professionally unacceptable, as it still leaves the investigation vulnerable to perceptions of bias and does not proactively mitigate the risk of actual or perceived influence. The personal relationship, even if managed professionally, creates an inherent risk that cannot be fully neutralized without external oversight or a change in investigative personnel. A further incorrect approach would be to discuss the ongoing investigation with the senior manager in a non-professional capacity, seeking their perspective or offering reassurance. This is professionally unacceptable, as it constitutes a serious breach of investigative protocol and confidentiality. It directly compromises the integrity of the investigation, potentially alerts the subject to the scope and direction of the inquiry, and violates ethical obligations to maintain the confidentiality and impartiality of the investigative process. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a proactive and transparent approach to potential conflicts of interest. Agents should be trained to recognize situations that could lead to conflicts, including personal relationships with subjects or witnesses. Upon identification, the immediate steps should be to consult relevant ethical guidelines and regulations, and to report the situation to a supervisor. The decision-making process should prioritize the integrity of the investigation and the reputation of the OIG above all else. Recusal, when a conflict is identified, is often the most effective and ethically sound solution to ensure impartiality and maintain public trust. Question 12. Assessment of an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent's response to a credible allegation of financial misconduct involving an Amtrak employee, where initial inquiries suggest the employee may have stored incriminating digital evidence on their personal work laptop. Considering the principles of federal law enforcement investigation within the United States, what is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent to take regarding access to the employee's laptop? Option A. Formally request a subpoena or other appropriate court-ordered process, based on probable cause or a demonstrated legitimate investigative purpose, to authorize the search and seizure of the employee's personal work laptop. Option B. Rely on a verbal directive from a supervisor to access and search the employee's personal work laptop. Assuming this constitutes sufficient authorization, Option C. Postpone any action related to accessing the laptop until a clear and unambiguous policy is issued specifically addressing such scenarios, to avoid any potential procedural missteps. Option D. Directly access the employee's personal work laptop to conduct an immediate search for evidence, believing the urgency of the allegation justifies bypassing formal procedures. The correct answer is A. Formally request a subpoena or other appropriate court-ordered process, based on probable cause or a demonstrated legitimate investigative purpose, to authorize the search and seizure of the employee's personal work laptop. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agents, balancing the need for thorough investigation with the protection of individual rights and the integrity of ongoing operations. The agent must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that their actions are both legally sound and ethically defensible, adhering strictly to the investigative protocols and ethical guidelines governing federal law enforcement within the United States. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of seeking appropriate legal authorization before accessing sensitive information. This begins with a clear articulation of the investigative need, a thorough review of relevant Amtrak OIG policies and federal statutes governing access to employee records, and consultation with legal counsel. Obtaining a subpoena or other court-ordered process, based on probable cause or a demonstrated legitimate investigative purpose, is the cornerstone of lawful and ethical information gathering. This method ensures that the investigation is conducted within the bounds of privacy laws and established investigative procedures, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the investigation and protecting the rights of the individual. It also provides a clear audit trail and justification for the actions taken, which is crucial for accountability and oversight. An incorrect approach would be to directly access the employee's personal computer without any form of legal authorization or documented justification. This bypasses established legal safeguards designed to protect individual privacy and could be construed as a violation of federal privacy laws and Amtrak OIG policy. Such an action would lack the necessary legal basis, potentially rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible and exposing the agent and Amtrak OIG to legal challenges. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a verbal request from a supervisor to access the computer. While supervisors play a role in directing investigations, their verbal directives do not supersede the legal requirements for obtaining access to private electronic devices. This method lacks the formal documentation and legal authorization necessary for such a significant investigative step, creating ambiguity and potential for abuse. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation indefinitely due to uncertainty about the proper procedure. A caution is warranted. A complete lack of action in the face of a credible investigative lead is not professionally sound. The agent has a duty to investigate, and this duty must be balanced with adherence to legal and ethical standards. The professional reasoning process requires a proactive engagement with the investigative challenge, seeking guidance and following established protocols to move the investigation forward lawfully and ethically. Professionals should always consult relevant policies, seek legal advice when necessary, and meticulously document all investigative steps and decisions. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals that an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent in Pennsylvania, while investigating potential procurement irregularities within a specific Amtrak department, discovers that their sibling is a senior manager in that very department. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent to take to maintain the integrity of the investigation and uphold ethical standards? Option A. Subtly steer the investigation away from areas that might directly implicate their siblings' responsibilities, while still addressing the broader procurement issues. Option B. Continue with the investigation, relying on their personal integrity to remain impartial and avoid any bias. Option C. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the OIG's designated ethics official, requesting guidance on recusal or reassignment. Option D. Discuss the investigation's progress and specific findings with their sibling to understand their perspective and potential impact on the department. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the OIG's designated ethics official, requesting guidance on recusal or reassignment. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest within the Amtrak Office of Inspector General OIG Special Agent Program in Pennsylvania. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to navigate complex ethical boundaries while upholding their duty to investigate and report findings impartially. The integrity of the OIG's investigations hinges on the agent's ability to remain objective and avoid situations that could compromise their independence or create the appearance of impropriety. The best approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict to the appropriate supervisory authority within the Amtrak OIG. This approach is correct because it adheres to fundamental principles of ethical conduct and OIG investigative standards, which mandate reporting any circumstances that could reasonably be perceived as compromising an investigation or an agent's impartiality. By proactively informing supervisors, the agent allows the OIG to implement appropriate safeguards, such as recusal from specific aspects of the investigation or reassignment, thereby preserving the integrity of the investigative process and public trust. This aligns with the OIG's mandate to conduct independent and objective oversight. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investigation without disclosing the relationship, assuming personal integrity is sufficient to overcome the conflict. This fails to acknowledge the importance of perceived impartiality, a cornerstone of investigative ethics. It also violates the principle of transparency and accountability expected of OIG personnel. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly influence the investigation to favor the relative's department, even without explicit instruction. This constitutes a direct breach of ethical duty and potentially criminal conduct, as it involves manipulating an official investigation for personal gain or to protect a family member. Such actions undermine the OIG's mission and the public's confidence in its work. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to discuss the ongoing investigation with the relative, even in general terms, to gauge their reaction or seek information. This is a severe breach of confidentiality and investigative protocol, potentially jeopardizing the investigation, compromising evidence, and violating privacy laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to established ethical guidelines, and consultation with supervisors when faced with potential conflicts of interest. This involves a proactive assessment of any personal relationships or circumstances that could influence objectivity, followed by prompt reporting to the designated authority to ensure appropriate mitigation strategies are implemented. The guiding principle should always be to maintain the highest standards of integrity and impartiality. Question 14. Regulatory review indicates that an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent has uncovered evidence of potential financial misconduct within a specific Amtrak department. The agent has compiled detailed financial records and internal communications related to the alleged misconduct. The agent is approached by a journalist seeking information about ongoing investigations and also considers sharing the findings with other Amtrak departments not directly involved in the investigation to raise awareness of potential risks. Furthermore, the agent has made personal copies of some sensitive documents for future reference. Considering the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, and Amtrak's internal policies on investigative data handling, which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the special agent? Option A. Disclose the full investigative findings to the journalist to ensure public accountability and retain personal copies of all sensitive documents for future reference, regardless of official record-keeping procedures. Option B. Share the investigative findings with all Amtrak employees to ensure widespread awareness of potential misconduct and to encourage self-reporting, while also providing the journalist with a summary of the allegations. Option C. Strictly adhere to Amtrak OIG policies and federal regulations regarding the handling and dissemination of investigative information, sharing findings only with authorized personnel for legitimate investigative purposes through secure, documented channels, and ensuring proper record retention and disposal. Option D. Provide the journalist with selected details of the investigation, arguing that transparency is important, and also share the findings with other Amtrak departments to proactively address potential risks. The correct answer is C. Strictly adhere to Amtrak OIG policies and federal regulations regarding the handling and dissemination of investigative information, sharing findings only with authorized personnel for legitimate investigative purposes through secure, documented channels, and ensuring proper record retention and disposal. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG mandate to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, and the need to maintain the confidentiality of sensitive information obtained during an investigation. Special agents must balance their duty to uncover wrongdoing with their legal and ethical obligations to protect individuals' privacy and prevent the unauthorized disclosure of information that could prejudice ongoing investigations or harm innocent parties. The potential for misuse of information, even if obtained legally, necessitates a rigorous and principled approach to its handling and dissemination. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to Amtrak OIG policies and federal regulations governing the handling of investigative information. This means that any information obtained during an investigation, particularly sensitive financial or personal data, must only be shared with authorized personnel for legitimate investigative purposes and only through secure, documented channels. This approach ensures compliance with privacy laws, maintains the integrity of the investigation, and prevents the unauthorized disclosure of information that could compromise the OIG's mission or violate individuals' rights. The specific regulations governing Amtrak OIG investigations, such as those derived from the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, and relevant Department of Justice guidelines on information sharing and confidentiality, would dictate the precise procedures for such disclosures. Incorrect approaches analysis. Sharing investigative findings with external parties, such as a journalist, without proper authorization and a clear legal basis, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action violates confidentiality requirements, potentially jeopardizes ongoing investigations by tipping off subjects, and could lead to legal repercussions for unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. It undermines the OIG's credibility and its ability to conduct impartial investigations. Disseminating investigative findings broadly within Amtrak to non-essential personnel, even if they are not directly involved in the investigation, is also professionally unacceptable. This over-dissemination increases the risk of information leaks, creates unnecessary speculation, and can unfairly stigmatize individuals or departments before a formal conclusion is reached. It fails to respect the principle of need-to-know access. Retaining copies of sensitive investigative documents indefinitely without a clear purpose or authorization, and storing them in an unsecured manner, represents a failure to comply with record retention policies and data security protocols. This practice increases the risk of data breaches and unauthorized access, violating privacy regulations and potentially compromising future investigations or legal proceedings. Professional reasoning. When faced with investigative findings that may have broader implications, professionals must first consult their agency's internal policies and relevant federal statutes regarding information disclosure and confidentiality. The guiding principle should always be need to know and authorized purpose. Any proposed disclosure must be evaluated against these principles. If there is any doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel within the OIG is paramount. The decision-making process should prioritize the integrity of the investigation, the protection of sensitive information, and compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. Question 15. Consider a scenario where an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent in Delaware has uncovered preliminary evidence suggesting potential financial improprieties within a specific Amtrak department. The agent believes that disseminating this information promptly to relevant Amtrak management and potentially the public could prevent further financial losses. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the special agent? Option A. Initiate a formal internal consultation process with OIG legal counsel and senior leadership to review the findings, determine the appropriate level of disclosure, and establish a communication strategy that respects investigative integrity and legal requirements. Option B. Immediately release the preliminary findings to the media to ensure public awareness and encourage immediate corrective action by Amtrak management. Option C. Share the unverified allegations and speculative information internally with department heads not directly involved in the investigation to alert them to potential risks. Option D. Proceed with a broad internal memo to all Amtrak employees detailing the suspected financial improprieties without prior review or authorization. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal internal consultation process with OIG legal counsel and senior leadership to review the findings, determine the appropriate level of disclosure, and establish a communication strategy that respects investigative integrity and legal requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG mandate to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, and the need to maintain the integrity of ongoing investigations while respecting the rights of individuals involved. Special agents must balance the urgency of information dissemination with the potential for compromising investigative leads or prejudicing individuals before formal findings are made. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any public statements or internal communications are accurate, objective, and do not violate established protocols or legal standards. The best approach involves a thorough internal review and consultation process before any information is released externally or broadly internally. This includes verifying the accuracy and completeness of the information, assessing its relevance to the public interest, and ensuring compliance with Amtrak OIG policies and any applicable federal regulations governing the disclosure of investigative information. Consultation with legal counsel and senior OIG leadership is crucial to determine the appropriate level of detail, the intended audience, and the most effective and ethical method of communication, whether through a formal report, a public statement, or an internal briefing. This ensures that the information is disseminated responsibly, without jeopardizing the investigation or violating privacy rights, aligning with the OIG's mission to promote accountability and efficiency within Amtrak. Releasing preliminary findings directly to the media without proper vetting and authorization is professionally unacceptable. This action could prematurely disclose sensitive investigative details, potentially alerting subjects of the investigation and hindering the collection of further evidence. It also risks misrepresenting the findings or creating a public perception of guilt before a thorough investigation is complete, which could lead to legal challenges and damage the credibility of the OIG. Furthermore, it bypasses established internal review processes designed to ensure accuracy and adherence to disclosure guidelines. Sharing unverified allegations or speculative information internally with departments not directly involved in the investigation, without a clear need-to-know and proper authorization, is also professionally unsound. This can create unnecessary alarm, foster a climate of distrust, and potentially lead to the inadvertent leakage of information to external parties. It undermines the controlled dissemination of information necessary to maintain investigative integrity and protect the rights of those under scrutiny. Failing to consult with legal counsel or senior OIG leadership before making any public statements or significant internal disclosures is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. This oversight can lead to statements that are legally inaccurate, ethically questionable, or in violation of Amtrak OIG policies and federal guidelines regarding the handling of investigative information. It demonstrates a lack of adherence to established protocols for oversight and accountability within the OIG. The professional reasoning process for special agents in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the OIG's investigative mandate, ethical obligations, and relevant legal frameworks. When faced with a situation requiring information dissemination, agents should first identify the purpose of the communication and the intended audience. They must then rigorously verify the accuracy and completeness of the information. Crucially, they should consult with their supervisors, legal counsel, and relevant OIG leadership to ensure that any communication aligns with established policies, legal requirements, and the overarching mission of the OIG. This structured approach prioritizes integrity, accuracy, and responsible disclosure, safeguarding both the investigative process and the rights of individuals. Question 16. Upon reviewing allegations of potential financial misconduct by an Amtrak employee in Illinois, what is the most professionally sound and legally compliant method for special agents of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General to gather evidence? Option A. Initiate a formal investigation, seeking legal authorization for any access to private electronic communications or financial records that are not publicly available, and meticulously document all investigative steps. Option B. Access the employee's personal work computer and email account without a warrant based on the suspicion of misconduct to search for relevant evidence. Option C. Rely solely on anonymous tips and informal conversations with colleagues to build a case against the employee. Option D. Inform the employee of the ongoing investigation and share preliminary findings to gauge their reaction and potentially elicit a confession. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal investigation, seeking legal authorization for any access to private electronic communications or financial records that are not publicly available, and meticulously document all investigative steps. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for thorough investigation and the imperative to respect individual privacy and due process. Special agents must balance their investigative mandate with legal and ethical boundaries, particularly when dealing with sensitive information that could impact an individual's career and reputation. The core of the challenge lies in determining the appropriate scope and method of information gathering to ensure the investigation is both effective and lawful, avoiding overreach or the use of improperly obtained evidence. The best approach involves a systematic and legally compliant information gathering process. This entails initiating a formal investigation based on credible allegations, obtaining necessary legal authorizations, such as subpoenas or warrants, if applicable and supported by probable cause, for any information that falls outside of readily accessible public records or voluntary disclosures, and meticulously documenting all investigative steps and findings. This method ensures that all information gathered is admissible, respects the rights of the individual under investigation, and adheres to Amtrak's internal policies and relevant federal regulations governing investigations and data privacy. The justification for this approach is rooted in principles of due process, the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the need for evidence to be obtained lawfully to be considered in any disciplinary or legal proceedings. An approach that involves accessing an employee's personal electronic devices without a warrant or explicit consent, based solely on a suspicion of misconduct, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a violation of privacy rights and likely contravenes federal laws and Amtrak's own policies regarding electronic surveillance and data access. Such actions could lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability for the Amtrak OIG, and damage to the agency's credibility. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely solely on unsubstantiated rumors or anonymous tips to build a case without independent corroboration or a formal investigative process. While tips can initiate an inquiry, they do not, in themselves, provide sufficient grounds for intrusive investigative action. This method lacks the rigor required for a fair and effective investigation and risks unjustly targeting individuals based on hearsay. Finally, an approach that involves sharing preliminary or unverified investigative findings with unauthorized personnel or the subject of the investigation prematurely is also professionally unsound. This can compromise the integrity of the investigation, create undue stress and reputational damage for the individual, and potentially alert them to the investigation in a way that allows for the destruction of evidence or further misconduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legality, ethical conduct, and procedural fairness. This involves understanding the scope of their authority, the legal limitations on their investigative powers, and the importance of obtaining proper authorization before accessing sensitive information. A structured approach, beginning with a formal assessment of allegations, followed by a plan for lawful information gathering, and concluding with a thorough and objective report, is essential for maintaining professional integrity and achieving just outcomes. Question 17. When evaluating potential fraud in Amtrak ticket sales within Delaware, what is the most appropriate method for an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent to obtain personal information from third-party ticket purchasers who are not themselves suspects in the alleged scheme? Option A. Rely exclusively on publicly available information about ticket purchasers and refrain from any direct contact or data collection from individuals, even if it means the investigation remains incomplete. Option B. Seek voluntary consent from the third-party ticket purchasers before collecting their personal information, or obtain a subpoena or court order if consent is not provided and the information is essential for the investigation. Option C. Collect the personal information of third-party ticket purchasers without their knowledge or consent, assuming it is necessary for the investigation and that the OIG has broad authority to gather such data. Option D. Proceed with the investigation by assuming the existence of fraud based on initial observations and collect personal information from third parties that appears relevant, without formal legal authorization or explicit consent. The correct answer is B. Seek voluntary consent from the third-party ticket purchasers before collecting their personal information, or obtain a subpoena or court order if consent is not provided and the information is essential for the investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Amtrak Office of Inspector General OIG Special Agent in Delaware, requiring a delicate balance between investigative duties and respecting the privacy rights of individuals. The agent must gather information relevant to a potential fraud scheme involving Amtrak ticket sales while operating within the strict confines of federal law and Amtrak's internal policies. The challenge lies in obtaining necessary evidence without overstepping legal boundaries, particularly concerning the collection of personal information from third parties who are not directly implicated in the suspected fraud. This requires careful consideration of the scope of authority, the nature of the information sought, and the potential impact on individuals' privacy. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining consent from individuals before collecting their personal information, or demonstrating a clear legal basis for its collection without consent, such as a subpoena or a court order, when investigating potential fraud. This approach respects individual privacy rights guaranteed under federal law and aligns with the OIG's mandate to conduct thorough and lawful investigations. Specifically, agents must adhere to the Privacy Act of 1974 and relevant Amtrak policies that govern the collection, use, and disclosure of personally identifiable information. Obtaining voluntary consent or utilizing legal process ensures that the investigation is conducted ethically and legally, minimizing the risk of civil liability or administrative sanctions against the agent and Amtrak. Incorrect approach is analysis. Collecting personal information from third parties without their explicit consent or a valid legal justification, such as a subpoena or court order, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action violates the principles of privacy and due process, potentially contravening the Privacy Act of 1974 and other federal statutes protecting personal data. Such an approach could lead to the suppression of evidence, disciplinary action against the agent, and legal challenges against Amtrak. Furthermore, engaging in unauthorized data collection erodes public trust in the OIG and Amtrak's commitment to lawful and ethical conduct. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on publicly available information without attempting to verify its accuracy or completeness through more direct, legally permissible means, especially when investigating a complex fraud scheme. While public information can be a starting point, it may not be sufficient to establish the elements of a fraud offense. Failing to pursue all legally available avenues for evidence collection could result in an incomplete investigation and an inability to substantiate the allegations, thereby undermining the OIG's effectiveness. Finally, assuming the existence of fraud based on preliminary observations without conducting a thorough investigation and gathering corroborating evidence is professionally unsound. This premature conclusion can lead to biased information gathering and an unfair targeting of individuals. The OIG's role is to investigate, not to prejudge. A proper investigation requires objective evidence collection and analysis to determine if a violation has occurred. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a systematic approach to investigations. This begins with clearly defining the scope of the investigation and identifying the specific legal and policy frameworks that govern their actions. When dealing with personal information, the default position should be to respect privacy and seek consent or legal authorization. Agents must continuously assess the legality and proportionality of their investigative steps, ensuring that each action is justified by the investigative objective and adheres to all applicable laws and regulations. A commitment to ethical conduct, transparency where appropriate, and due process is paramount in maintaining the integrity of the investigative process and the credibility of the OIG. Question 18. The analysis reveals that an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent, while conducting an investigation into potential financial improprieties within a specific Amtrak department in Delaware, uncovers preliminary evidence suggesting a pattern of fraudulent expense reporting by a mid-level manager. The agent is concerned about the ongoing financial impact and the potential for further misconduct. What is the most appropriate and professionally sound course of action for the special agent to take immediately following this discovery, adhering to federal investigative standards and Amtrak OIG protocols? Option A. Directly contact the Amtrak Human Resources Department to inform them of the preliminary findings and recommend immediate disciplinary action against the manager. Option B. Document all findings meticulously and report them immediately to the special agent in charge, SAC, or designated investigative supervisor for review and strategic guidance on next steps. Option C. Discuss the preliminary findings with other special agents in the office who are not directly involved in this specific investigation to solicit their opinions and advice. Option D. Hold on to the preliminary findings and continue gathering more evidence independently until the case is fully developed and irrefutable before reporting anything to superiors. The correct answer is B. Document all findings meticulously and report them immediately to the special agent in charge, SAC, or designated investigative supervisor for review and strategic guidance on next steps. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between the Amtrak Office of Inspector General's OIG mandate to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, and the need to maintain the integrity of ongoing investigations. Special agents must balance the urgency of reporting potential misconduct with the imperative to avoid compromising evidence or tipping off subjects. This requires a nuanced understanding of investigative protocols and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all findings and reporting them through established internal channels, specifically to the special agent in charge, SAC, or designated investigative supervisor, for review and strategic dissemination. This ensures that information is handled in a controlled manner, aligned with the OIG's investigative plan, and adheres to the principles of evidence preservation and due process. The OIG's authority and investigative procedures, as outlined in relevant federal statutes and Amtrak OIG policies, emphasize a structured reporting mechanism to maintain the integrity of investigations and prevent premature disclosure that could jeopardize the investigation's success or the rights of individuals involved. An incorrect approach would be to directly contact the Amtrak Human Resources Department with preliminary findings without prior authorization from the SAC. This bypasses the established chain of command and investigative protocols, potentially compromising the investigation by alerting the subject prematurely or providing incomplete information that could lead to misinterpretations or inappropriate disciplinary actions. This action violates the OIG's procedural guidelines for handling sensitive investigative information and could undermine the OIG's credibility and effectiveness. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the preliminary findings with colleagues outside of the immediate investigative team who are not privy to the case. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality, which is a cornerstone of investigative work. Such discussions can lead to the unauthorized dissemination of sensitive information, potentially prejudicing the investigation and violating the privacy of individuals involved. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay reporting the findings altogether, waiting for absolute certainty or complete evidence before informing supervisors. While thoroughness is important, undue delay in reporting significant findings can hinder the OIG's ability to act swiftly, potentially allowing further misconduct to occur or evidence to be lost. The professional reasoning process should involve a clear understanding of the OIG's reporting structure, the importance of evidence integrity, and the ethical duty to report findings promptly and through appropriate channels. Professionals should always consult their supervisory chain for guidance on sensitive matters and adhere strictly to established investigative procedures. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that conducting a thorough investigation into potential procurement fraud at an Amtrak-related vendor in Illinois could yield significant savings for the agency. An Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent discovers that the owner of this vendor is a close personal friend with whom they have a long-standing relationship. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Attempt to gather information indirectly through other sources to avoid direct interaction with the vendor's owner, thereby mitigating the conflict. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the special agent in charge and recuse themselves from any investigative activities directly involving the vendor's business. Option C. Proceed with the investigation, relying on personal objectivity to ensure fairness, and only disclose the relationship if it becomes a significant impediment. Option D. Conduct the investigation discreetly, disclosing the relationship only after the investigation is complete to avoid prejudicing the outcome. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the special agent in charge and recuse themselves from any investigative activities directly involving the vendor's business. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agent in Illinois due to the potential for conflicts of interest and the need to maintain impartiality and public trust. The agent must navigate a situation where personal relationships could compromise the integrity of an investigation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all investigative actions are based solely on evidence and legal standards, free from any undue influence. The best professional approach involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the special agent in charge, SAC, and recusing oneself from any aspect of the investigation that directly involves the individual's business. This approach is correct because it adheres to fundamental principles of investigative ethics and Amtrak OIG policy, which emphasize avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. Disclosure ensures transparency and allows for proper management of the conflict by the agency. Recusal removes the agent from a position where their judgment could be perceived as biased, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the investigation and maintaining public confidence in the OIG's work. This aligns with the general ethical obligations of federal investigators to act with integrity and impartiality. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investigation without disclosing the relationship, believing personal objectivity can be maintained. This fails to address the appearance of impropriety, which can be as damaging as actual bias. It violates ethical standards that require proactive disclosure of potential conflicts. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the relationship after the investigation has progressed significantly or concluded. This delay undermines transparency and can create suspicion about the motives and findings of the investigation, potentially leading to challenges to its validity. Finally, attempting to subtly influence the investigation in favor of the acquaintance, even if not overtly, represents a severe ethical and professional breach, directly compromising the agent's duty to conduct impartial investigations based on facts and law. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to agency policy. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest early, understanding the specific ethical guidelines and reporting requirements of their agency, Amtrak OIG in this case, and taking decisive action to mitigate any perceived or actual bias. The default should always be disclosure and, if necessary, recusal, to uphold the highest standards of public service and investigative integrity. Question 20. Implementation of a new payroll system for Amtrak Office of Inspector General Special Agents in Pennsylvania requires a review of overtime compensation calculations. Agent John Doe, a special agent in Pennsylvania, worked 45 hours in a given work week. His annual salary is $75,000, and he receives a $500 monthly stipend for specialized equipment. Assuming a standard 52-week year and that the monthly stipend is considered part of his regular rate of pay for overtime calculation purposes, what is the total overtime pay Agent Doe is entitled to for that work week? Option A, $500,000. Option B, $649,004. Option C, $432,069. Option D, $973,056. Correct answer is B, $649,004. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the accurate calculation of overtime compensation for special agents of the Amtrak Office of Inspector General OIG in Pennsylvania, ensuring compliance with federal labor laws, specifically the Fair Labor Standards Act (FLSA), as it applies to federal employees. And Amtrak's internal policies is paramount. Miscalculations can lead to significant financial liabilities for Amtrak and potential legal action, as well as damage to the OIG's reputation for diligence and fairness. The complexity arises from the potential for varying pay rates, overtime calculations, and the need to adhere to specific record-keeping requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous, step-by-step calculation of overtime pay based on the agent's regular rate of pay, multiplied by 1.5 for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek. This approach correctly applies the FLSA overtime provisions. The regular rate of pay must include all remuneration for employment paid to the employee, divided by the number of hours worked in the workweek. For special agents, this typically includes their base salary. Any additional compensation, such as shift differentials or hazard pay, must also be factored into the regular rate if it is considered part of their remuneration for employment. The calculation for overtime pay would then be overtime pay equals regular rate of pay *1.5 overtime hours. This aligns with the principles of the FLSA, which mandates time and a half for overtime work to compensate employees for the additional burden and to discourage excessive hours. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply multiply the agent's hourly equivalent of their base salary by the number of overtime hours worked, without applying the 1.5 multiplier. This fails to comply with the FLSA requirement for premium pay for overtime hours, directly violating the Act's core provisions. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate overtime based on a fixed number of hours per day rather than the total hours worked in a workweek. The FLSA defines overtime based on hours worked in a workweek, over 40 hours, not on a daily basis, unless a specific state law or collective bargaining agreement dictates otherwise, which is not the primary federal standard. A further incorrect approach would be to exclude certain forms of compensation, such as per diem allowances or travel reimbursement, from the calculation of the regular rate of pay when they are considered remuneration for employment. While some specific reimbursements might be excludable, a broad exclusion without proper analysis of their nature under FLSA regulations would be erroneous and could lead to underpayment of overtime. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a systematic approach to compensation calculations. This involves 1. Clearly identifying all components of an employee's remuneration for employment. 2. Accurately determining the number of hours worked in each workweek. 3. Applying the FLSA definition of the regular rate of pay. 4. Calculating overtime at 1.5 times the regular rate for all hours exceeding 40 in a workweek. 5. Maintaining meticulous records to support all calculations. When in doubt about the classification of compensation or the application of specific FLSA provisions, consulting with legal counsel or the Department of Labor is a critical step in ensuring compliance and mitigating risk.